New Zealand history is usually told from the first settlers from Polynesia to European colonization all the way to the World Wars. Typically of majority white countries on previously native land, what sets New Zealand apart from the rest is that between the first settlers and European colonization, there was a large-scale war that occurred among Maori tribes. Known as the Musket Wars, it was one of the largest wars fought on New Zealand soil, and despite making a significant impact on the island's history, many people are unaware of this conflict. So what made the Musket Wars so brutal, and why was it forgotten? Being a warlike people, warfare has been a factor of Maori life. Though it resulted with the acquisition of territory, slaves, and prestige, much of it was influenced by the concept of mana, which could be gained by inheritance or wealth, and utu, a form of exchange or balance in which one party pays compensation equal to that to an offense or a crime done to a tribe or individual. If neither side could balance their utu peacefully, each side could take one's property by force or go to war, regardless of how severe the offense was. While these wars were relatively bloodless, the constant warfare led to many Maori tribes build fortifications known as the pa. As for weapons, it consists of a variety of spears or short clubs known as patu, which are made of stone, wood, or bone. Upon the arrival of Europeans in the late 18th century, it wasn't long that trade relations were established. Known as the pakeo to the Maoris, they traded food, timber, flax, and sometimes women. In exchange, Europeans introduced goods such as textiles, metal tools, potatoes, and most importantly, muskets. Though these muskets were cheaply made and slow to reload, which a skilled warrior could easily counter using traditional weapons, one Nagapui chief by the name of Hanka Hika would use it at the Battle of Monotonuri in 1808. Though it resulted with defeat, the potential of muskets caused him to seek further relations with Europe, allowing missionaries to establish missions for muskets. Hanka Hika then launched campaigns south, in which the captured slaves would be put to work in farming for muskets. Outside capturing slaves, he also acquired muskets by selling as gifts upon his visit to England, though he will keep the chainmail, which gave him a reputation of being indestructible. Muskets did not change warfare overnight, but Hanka Hika's actions resulted with other neighboring tribes to acquire muskets for self-defense. Soon, an arms race ensued, in which warring tribes tried to acquire territory and slaves for muskets. The Maoris also used double-barrel shotguns known as the tupara, in addition to metal tools and their traditional weapons, as not all troops could be fitted with muskets. Besides guns, the other main key ingredient that changed Maori warfare was the potato. Though the Maori had their own sweet potatoes, known as the kumala, regular potatoes were far more reliable as a food source for campaigns, and since the potato doesn't require men to cultivate, it also freed up labor for war, in addition to making slaves much more valuable. Lastly, the potato could be used as cash crops to trade for muskets. However, muskets were not cheap, as one musket, regardless of quality, could cost as much as 200 baskets of potato, which led to some Maoris starving as a result. As muskets become more widespread throughout New Zealand, what was once a series of quick wars to solve affairs now become a long drawn-out war, with major battles, with tactics having to be developed to accommodate muskets. One of these was the pa, which originally used to protect villages from raids, had now become a fortress, known as the gunfighter pa. These fortresses not only boasted better protection and accommodation for musket fighting, it also introduced a series of trenches, which proved to be effective, especially against the British decades later. Despite its technological advances, the Musket Wars proved to be devastating for the Maori, as constant warfare led to some regions depopulated as a result of the war. One example was the invasion of the Chatham Islands, which saw the near extermination of the pacifist Moriori people, which today have never recovered. But by far the biggest consequences is that it allowed the Europeans to exert influence over the island. Though colonization was still inevitable, the Musket Wars made colonization and settlement much easier, resulting in many Maori tribes to cede their land through treaties. The lack of exposure and starvation caused by the overtraining of muskets led to more Maori die of disease, It didn't help that the mixed racing between mostly white men and Maori women caused the gene pool to favor the settlers, which can be seen with the Native Americans. Overall, of the 100,000 Maori in the island before the war, about 20,000 were killed in the fighting, which was about 20% of the Maori population at the time, making it the most deadliest war in New Zealand in terms of population. Despite its significance, why were the Musket Wars forgotten? As out of the 3,000 battles that supposedly take place, none of them had their own article dedicated to them. This is due to lack of writing, and although Europeans were present, they either didn't care to write them, kept it in the archives for those who did, or were largely unaware of the conflict. Oral history does exist, but a lot of the Maoris who experienced it kept it to themselves due to how devastating it was. This could be solved with archaeology and a team of dedicated historians, but I believe the reason why no one talks about it is because it doesn't fit into the woke narrative that many recent historians like to push. You see, a lot of people like to believe that Europe, i.e. the white man, is responsible for every bad thing that ever happened to the native peoples whenever they landed outside their continent. Although there is some truth to that statement, it's way overemphasized to the point of blackwashing, which is why the Musket Wars were never talked about, because the conflict is largely inflicted upon the Maori themselves, not to mention the extermination against the Moriori. There's also some people pushing the Potato Wars narrative. Sure, potatoes did play a huge role in the conflict, but it's more of a side effect rather than the actual cause. With that out of the way, hopefully this video introduces you to the Musket Wars, as it deserves way more exposure than it has currently, as well as debunking the BS surrounding it.
I'm so horny, like a degenerate I am.